What's going on, guys? Ryan Nelson here, and today we're talking about the new Canon R6. I've been testing this out for a little while now. This video is all about this as a photo camera. If you want to learn more about this as a video camera, I'm gonna link that right up there. If there's no link up there, it will be up soon. Keep an eye out for it. So if you want to keep an eye out for that, hit that subscribe button down there. I'm gonna get that out of the way on this video. So just out of curiosity, what camera do you use right now for photography? Just for photos, what do you use? Put that down in the comments, let me know. I'm really curious. Just trying to get to know you guys a little bit better. So, talking about the Canon R6 in photo mode and what makes this so special as a photo camera, what makes this kind of a weak link as a photo camera, and just take a look at it. So let's dive right into it. Let's go ahead and talk about the IBIS in photo mode. It does help when doing handheld shots. So if you're gonna be doing street photography, low light photography, maybe wedding, this is a great camera for, say, a wedding or an event photographer. When you're in lower lights and you want to do slower shutter speeds, you can't, you don't want to carry around a tripod, but you still want stable shots. This IBIS is going to help you out with slower shutter speeds. So for low light photos, I did take this out. I tested it. I was doing a 1/2 second exposure, handheld, and I did get some sharper shots with the image stabilizer on there. That being said, you do have to sit there and take a few shots at that very slow shutter speed because you do get camera shake. You still do get the shake, the sensor shake. It just can't keep up with some of the handheld shake that you have. But if you take a few repeatedly, you can get a more stable, sharp, crisp, clear shot with the help of the image stabilizer in body. So it works. I mean, it's better than no stabilization. So you may be put off a little bit by 20 megapixels. This camera is only 20 megapixels. Granted, it is the same sensor that is in the 1DX Mark III. That may inflate your bubble a little bit there about this camera, but it's still just a 20 megapixel sensor. Does that matter to you? I'm asking, does it matter to you? You may think it does, you may not know. So let me be brutally honest with a 20 megapixel sensor. Chances are it's not gonna matter that much to you unless you are doing billboard size prints, unless you are doing Photoshop where you're zooming into like 600, 800, 1000% in editing at that fine of detail. I do that sometimes. I have noticed a big difference when I moved up to the R and it was moving from, I don't remember if it was a 20 or a 25 megapixel camera to a 32 megapixel, which is in the EOS R. I did notice when I was doing photos in studio, I get in and I pin tool, like I do these very fine pin tool paths on these photos, and that jump from 20, 25 to 32 megapixels, I do notice that, but only when I'm zooming in to 600+%. So chances are, if you just want this camera for fun, if you're just getting into this, which is still kind of an expensive camera if you're just getting into this. Okay, let me rephrase that. Unless you are doing very fine detailed work or very large prints, 20 megapixels is going to be plenty for you. So that's just my opinion on how many megapixels you actually need. I think once they get to 20, it's fair game. Like they're all good. You're not gonna get that much better unless you're really, really getting into that work. Let's move on. So another great thing about this camera is it does 12 frames per second mechanical shutter or 20 frames per second with a electronic shutter. Now, the weird thing about the electronic shutter, if you're shooting fast things, like you could get a little jello effect. Sometimes you get it, sometimes you don't. It really depends on what you're filming. Shooting, photographing, not filming, photographing. So I actually have not tested out the high-speed burst mode on this yet. So I've gone ahead and set this up to the high-speed burst mode. And now we're just gonna take a listen and see how fast this shoots. So one thing with this is on the R. I know a lot of people complain about the R. They're like, oh, it shoots 7 frames per second, but if you put it into servo mode, it only shoots 4 frames or whatever it was. I don't remember the exact number, but I actually don't know what it does on this. So let's go ahead and shift this into servo mode and see if that frame rate slows down. Let's take a listen on this. Okay, so I'm gonna interrupt myself here for a second. I was just editing that little piece and I was just listening to that. I'm like, that does not sound like 12 frames a second. So I did a little bit more in-depth testing, and there are 3 shutter modes that you can do on the R6. You have your mechanical shutter, you have your electronic first curtain shutter, and then you're just plain electronic shutter. So on these 3 tests, my results are as such. Not 12 frames per second. On the mechanical shutter, I was averaging 7 frames per second. On the electronic first curtain shutter, I was averaging 8 frames per second. Okay, one more, you're getting one more. And then on the electronic shutter, I was getting about 23 frames per second. So a little bit better on that one. We're almost shooting video at that point, but not 12 frames per second. I don't know where they're getting that number. Maybe I had some settings incorrect in that camera, but that's what I was coming up with. I've changed focus mode to one-shot servo, didn't make a difference. I changed high speed plus, high speed, and low speed continuous shooting. Each one of those was obviously progressively slower than the last. But just to recap, mechanical shutter, 7 frames per second. Electronic first curtain shutter, 8 frames a second. The electronic shutter, I was getting 23 to 24 frames per second, so pretty good there. Back to my previous self with a different background. Let's go. So in servo mode, it sounds like we're still getting about 12 frames per second on that. It didn't slow down much. Still, that is a ton of frames per second. How many frames per second do you really need? That's like half of video. If you're shooting 12 frames a second, 24 frames is like your standard cinematic video frame rate. So you're already like halfway there. How many frames a second do you need? So big plus there if you like shooting faster frame rates. If you shoot in servo mode, I can't say I use servo mode a lot or ever or at all. So, I mean, I guess it works. I don't know. Not how I use this camera. So another feature that Canon has added into the R6 is the interval timer, which allows you to do photo time lapses. Say you want to get a time lapse, or even if you just want a shot of yourself a little bit farther in the distance, you don't have to run back with that 10-second timer, not get it, come back, do it again. You can just set an interval timer, go out to your shot, do whatever you want to do. Say you're doing one of those shots where you're standing on the tip of this rock looking over this epic view. That's another reason you can use that for time lapse. You can do it for self-portraits. You can do it for just a variety of different things. So moving on in photo mode, we're still in photo mode here, is taking a look at RAW photos versus CRAW photos. What's the difference, you might ask? Well, about half the file size. So in CRAW, you're gonna save a lot more space on your memory card. You're gonna save a lot more space in storing these photos on your hard drive. Are you losing much quality shooting CRAW versus shooting RAW? Now, in the past, I would always say, shoot RAW, shoot the best, absolute best quality you can, no matter what. Now, taking a look at the CRAW versus the RAW, now let's take a look at these 2 examples here. So these are the RAW photo and the CRAW photo. Now, as an overall, there's a tiny bit of difference, but I think that's more due to the sunset, the 30 seconds between exposures here. It looks pretty similar, pretty good. I mean, for half the file size, it's pretty good. So what I'm gonna do is zoom into 400%. I'm gonna take a look at these cactus down here in the shadowed area. Okay, so looking at the shadows on this one, I'm not noticing a very distinct difference between the 2. Now, I could sit here and go back and forth forever, and let's do that. Let's go back and forth. Okay, so back and forth, back and forth. We're on our full RAW, we're on our RAW. Let's zoom into 700%. we're gonna look at this right here. And we're gonna go full RAW, CRAW, full RAW, CRAW. I doubt that this difference is going to come through on YouTube. So what I'll tell you what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna put a link down below in the description. If you want to download these sample photos, take a deep look yourself. There's a link down below in the description for that. But as I'm looking at these in the shadows, I am noticing very minute difference. I can tell the CRAW versus the RAW here. Like one is just slightly more pixelated, but there's not much difference. So hang on, let's get into this a little bit more. We're gonna move up here into this highlight and shadowed area way back here in the distance. So you can barely see, we're still at 700%. So we're zoomed in a lot, but you can kind of see where the saguaros here are blending into the sky. They're getting some spill, so you can see them, but they're not there. So we're in CRAW. Let's switch this over to RAW. Back to CRAW, back to RAW, back to CRAW. I'm not noticing any difference in those two images. So I have to say, based on this image right here, CRAW is good. I'm gonna take a look at one more image here. So let's pull that next image up here. And then we're gonna zoom into 100%. Look how clear that is. Look how good that looks. 20 megapixels, that looks good. All right, so CRAW. And then we're going to click over into our RAW image. I mean, again, sunset light, there's a little shift in the light there, but that's the light, that's not CRAW versus RAW. Going back and forth at 100%, I am not seeing any difference there. Okay, so let's zoom into 400%. Let's look at this little shadow area down here on the curve of the road. Again, we're in CRAW. Look at the RAW. There's a car, there's that difference. There's a car in this shot. Okay, that doesn't matter. I mean, you can see grain structure in the road over here on both of these shots. Don't really notice the difference in the sign. I'm looking at the cactus. Tops of the cactus, I don't really notice the difference. Let's go take a look at this top of this peak here. This is CRAW, this is RAW, this is CRAW, this is RAW. There is hardly any difference in these two images. Okay, I spent way too long on that. CRAW versus RAW, just shoot CRAW. You're gonna save yourself time, you're gonna save yourself space, your computer is gonna work better, and you're gonna save hard drive space. So go CRAW, why not? As a photo camera, I know that's a very long pause. What would make me buy this camera? IBIS, if I was a wedding photographer, an event photographer, if I wanted to do a lot more street photography or low light photography, if I wanted to do any of that handheld, that's one really great reason to buy the R6 as a photo camera. If I wanted to do a lot more photo time lapses, that is another good reason to buy the R6. Honestly, as a photo camera, I'm really struggling why I would buy this camera over some of the other options out there on the market right now. Just strictly as a photo camera, I don't know. I don't see its place in the world right now. I mean, maybe a few years ago, this would have been a really amazing photo camera, but not right now. I mean, there's better options out there. Just to be honest, like that's it. Like, I'm not super impressed with this as a photo camera. So that's it. I tell you what, if you want to look at this yourself, if you want to look at the camera that I use as a photo camera, I've dropped links down in the description for both of those. Let me know what you think. Put that down in the comments. Let me know what you think of this video. Let me know what you think of the R6. Let me know what photo camera you use. What is your go-to photo camera? Tell you what, guys, if you found this video useful, helpful, informative, anything of the such, take a second, hit that thumbs up button down there, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and I will see you guys next time.